You know, when you think of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a certain image probably pops into your head, right? The perfect Stoic, the philosopher king, the guy who ruled over Rome's golden age with this unshakable calm and wisdom. But here's the thing, that perfect picture, it's really only half the story. So yeah, let's start with that legend, the story we all know. This wise, totally unflappable ruler whose time in charge is remembered as the absolute peak of Roman prosperity and peace. He's basically held up as the real-life version of Plato's ideal philosopher king. And if you've ever read his personal journal, what we now call meditations, you can see why. It's just packed with these incredible thoughts on acceptance, on reason, on just doing your duty. It paints this portrait of a man who is in complete and total control of his own mind. Okay, but what if that's not the whole picture? The reality of the man and the world he lived in was so much more complex, way more dramatic, and honestly, a lot more human than that Stoic myth lets on. So let's start peeling back some of those layers. Because long before he became this Stoic icon, a young Marcus Aurelius was writing these unbelievably passionate letters to his rhetoric tutor, a man named Marcus Cornelius Fronto. And well, these letters, they show us a completely different guy. I mean, come on, breath of my life. Those are hardly the words of some detached, emotionless philosopher, are they? This is the voice of a young man who is deeply, powerfully, emotionally invested. He wrote this directly to Fronto. This isn't calm acceptance of fate. It's a fiery, all-consuming emotion. It's the exact opposite of the Stoic ideal we all associate with him. It's kind of shocking, actually. So right there, you've got this incredible contrast. On one side, you have the passionate young lover, just burning with this intense longing. And on the other, you have the Stoic ideal that he would later become famous for. The idea that you should only focus on what you can control. You know, your own thoughts and actions, not these wild external passions. So how on earth do you reconcile these two versions of the same man? Well, the answer might actually lie in the world that he was forced to rule. Because just as this complicated, passionate man takes the throne, his so-called golden age gets slammed by a disaster of almost unimaginable proportions. It all started in the East. Around 165 AD, during a military campaign, the disease first popped up among the legions. A year later, those same victorious soldiers came marching home, but they were unknowingly carrying the plague with them. It spread with terrifying speed. And after a short break, it came roaring back in 77 AD, even stronger than before. And here's the really tragic irony in all of this. The very things that made Rome so powerful and prosperous, its incredible network of engineered roads, its busy ports, all those interconnected cities, they suddenly became its greatest weakness. They turned into superhighways for the disease, letting it reach every single corner of the empire. At its absolute peak, the plague was killing almost 1 out of every 4 people across the Roman Empire, a quarter of the population. Just take a second to let that sink in. It's a level of death that is almost impossible for us to wrap our heads around today. So this brings up the ultimate question, doesn't it? What does a philosopher emperor, a man devoted to reason and logic, do when the world is literally collapsing all around him? How does that philosophy hold up in the face of catastrophe? The empire's response was, frankly, a mess of religious panic and total medical helplessness. People were desperately trying to figure out why the gods were so angry, offering these huge sacrifices that, of course, did nothing. Even the most famous physician of the day, Galen, he took one look at the horrific symptoms, wrote them down, and then fled Rome himself. Doctors could do nothing. They just watched their patients die. And the bodies of the poor, they were often just left abandoned on the roads. It was utter chaos. And this is where his stoicism wasn't just theory anymore. It became intensely practical. Right in the middle of all that terror, his philosophy gave him a framework, not of being cold and detached, but of unwavering duty. Look, he couldn't stop the plague, he knew that, but he could control his own response, to lead, to serve, to try and hold society together. He truly believed everyone had a job to do, a part to play. The plague did eventually burn itself out, but it left this permanent, devastating scar on the Roman world. And its true impact? Well, that's something historians are still arguing about to this very day. For a really long time, the common view was that this plague was the fatal blow. It was the one single event that kicked off the massive crises of the 3rd century and basically started Rome on its long, slow slide towards collapse. But more recently, that view has kind of shifted. Now, a lot of historians argue that, yeah, the plague was a terrible crisis, no doubt, but Rome's decline had all sorts of complex causes, and this was just one, albeit very serious, factor among many. And understanding all this context is just, it's everything. His famous meditations, they weren't written in some peaceful, quiet library in a palace. They were scribbled down in notebooks while he was in an army tent on the freezing northern frontier, surrounded by constant war and the shadow of this never-ending plague. And this is what ties it all together. That passionate young man from the letters, he had to learn how to master his emotions to become a leader. The emperor of a world ravaged by plague, he had to learn how to endure an apocalypse. For him, Stoicism was never an academic exercise. It was the practical tool he used to face it all. It was basically a survival kit for the soul. So that leaves us with one last big question. Do you think the book's incredible, enduring wisdom comes from some kind of pure, abstract, intellectual place? Or could it be that its real power comes from something far more raw, a philosophy that wasn't just thought up, but was forged in the fire of real, intense human suffering? Something to think about.